Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. In February 2026, a tremor of excitement rippled through the global archaeological community. It did not come from the Valley of the Kings, nor from the immediate shadow of the Great Pyramid, but from a dusty, often overlooked mound in Saite Renaissance, the site of ancient Memphis. A joint Egyptian-Chinese archaeological mission struck stone. But this was not just any stone. They uncovered the massive limestone foundations of a temple complex belonging to Apries Foundations, better known to history as Pharaoh Apries. While mainstream media flashed quick headlines about new temple discoveries, for scholars and historians, this find resonated on a much deeper frequency. It was the key to unlocking one of the most enigmatic and fascinating chapters in Egyptian history, the Saite Renaissance of the 26th Dynasty. This was a time when the pharaohs looked north from their capital in Memphis toward the ancient Giza Plateau and attempted an audacious project to rebuild and reclaim the lost glory of the Old Kingdom. These newly exposed stones are the latest piece of a colossal puzzle known as the Apries Foundations. For centuries, visitors to the region have been captivated by the towering pyramids of Giza, often completely ignoring the massive mud brick ruins that loom to the south. Yet, it is exactly here, in the interplay between the administrative heart of Memphis and the spiritual necropolis of Giza, that Pharaoh Apries left his indelible mark. His reign, spanning from 589 to 570 BCE, was a pivotal moment in human history. It was a desperate, glorious attempt to fuse the ancient past with a modern, multicultural future. To truly understand the Apries Foundations, we have to rediscover Giza not just as a static monument of the 4th dynasty, but as a living, breathing landscape of the 26th dynasty. It was a place of restoration, of pilgrimage, and of intense political theater, where a besieged pharaoh tried to shore up his rule with the sheer weight of history. Let us set the scene. By the time Apries ascended the throne in 589 BCE, the Great Pyramid of Khufu had already been standing for nearly 2 millennia. To the people of the 26th dynasty, the Giza Plateau was as ancient and mysterious as the Roman Colosseum is to us today. The Saites, hailing originally from the city of Sais in the Nile Delta, had miraculously reunited Egypt after centuries of chaos, fragmentation, and brutal foreign domination by the Assyrians and the Nubians. Their newfound legitimacy rested on a single powerful and unifying idea: archaism. They believed with absolute conviction that to make Egypt strong again, they had to return to the source of their ancient power. Art, language, and religion were deliberately and meticulously styled to mimic the Old Kingdom. Artists were dispatched to the ancient Giza mastabas to carefully copy scenes of daily life carved into the walls thousands of years prior. Scribes revived long-dead hieroglyphic forms, dusting off forgotten grammar to write new decrees. And the pharaohs began to view the Giza necropolis not merely as a cemetery of their ancestors, but as a national heritage site in desperate need of preservation. One of the most controversial and fascinating artifacts linking the era of Apries to Giza is the so-called inventory stela. Discovered in 1858 by Auguste Mariette in a small temple of Isis near the Great Pyramid, this limestone tablet recounts an incredible story. It claims that Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, actually found the Temple of Isis and the Great Sphinx already existing when he arrived, and that he merely repaired them. For decades, this stela completely baffled Egyptologists because it seemingly rewrote history, suggesting the Sphinx predated Khufu by an unknown epoch. However, modern scientific analysis and historical cross-referencing reveal that the text is almost certainly a pious forgery. It is essentially a piece of historical fiction created during the Saite period, very possibly during the reign of Apries himself. You see, the Saites were utterly obsessed with the cult of Isis, referring to her as the mistress of the pyramid. By creating this stela, the cunning priesthood of the 26th dynasty was projecting their own contemporary worship of Isis back into the mythological golden age of Khufu. It was their brilliant way of saying, our gods and our traditions were here from the very beginning. This artifact is a magnificent window into the Saite mind. It shows us that under Apries and his predecessors, Giza was bustling with intense activity. They were not just ancient tourists wandering among the ruins, they were active, dedicated curators. They cleared massive sand dunes from the body of the Sphinx, they painstakingly repaired the gleaming white casing stones of the pyramids, and they built entirely new temples right on the sacred plateau. But while Giza was the spiritual soul of this Saite revival, the city of Memphis was its undisputed muscle. And nowhere was this muscular display of power more visible than in the Palace of Apries. The recent 2026 excavations have thrust the Palace of Apries, often called Qasr Apries, back into the spotlight. This is a structure that the legendary archaeologist Flinders Petrie first explored in the early 20th century, but the new findings rewrite our understanding of its sheer scale. Unlike the ground-level palaces of earlier Egyptian eras, Apries decided to build his royal residence on a gargantuan artificial platform. This was a foundation in the most literal sense, rising over 40 feet, or roughly 13 meters, above the bustling streets of Memphis. Imagine standing on the fortified ramparts of this colossal palace in 575 BCE. If you looked to the north, the pyramids of Giza would be clearly visible on the horizon, gleaming brilliantly in the sun thanks to their white limestone casing, which was still largely intact at that time. If you turned and looked to the south, you would see the magnificent step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara piercing the sky. By building his palace on this massive elevated platform, Apries was literally elevating himself to the physical and spiritual level of his deified ancestors. This palace was essentially a fortress city. Its defensive walls were an astonishing 15 feet thick, explicitly designed to withstand a prolonged siege. The architecture was a breathtaking blend of traditional Egyptian grandeur and bold foreign innovation. The massive columns in the Great Reception Hall soared 40 feet high, topped with beautiful palm leaf capitals that aesthetically echoed the ancient, sacred groves of the Nile River. The 2026 archaeological mission has uncovered pristine limestone blocks from a previously unknown temple completely contained within this palace complex. This suggests that the platform was not just a secure home for the king, but a highly sophisticated cosmic engine, a sacred space where the living pharaoh communed directly with Pa, the ancient creator god of Memphis. From his elevated, heavily guarded throne room, Apries would have looked out over a truly cosmopolitan metropolis. Memphis, in the 26th Dynasty, was essentially the New York City of the ancient Mediterranean world. It was a vibrant, chaotic melting pot of languages, traditions, and cultures, driven by the dynasty's heavy reliance on international foreign trade and imported military might. The true foundations of Apries were not just made of limestone and mud brick, they were economic and demographic. The most striking feature of his reign, and tragically the one that would eventually seal his doom, was his overwhelming reliance on foreign mercenaries. The 26th dynasty is frequently referred to by historians as the Philhellenic, or Greek-loving dynasty. But the influx of foreigners was not limited to just Greeks. Carians, Ionians, Phoenicians, and Jews flocked to Memphis and the surrounding areas in unprecedented numbers. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian who visited Egypt about a century later, vividly described the military camps established by these Saite kings. These were not temporary, makeshift bivouacs. They were massive, permanent settlements. The camp of the Tyrians, housing the Phoenicians, was located just south of the Great Temple of Pata. Meanwhile, the heavily armed Greek and Carian mercenaries were stationed in strategic encampments near the Pelusiac branch of the Nile, before being formally relocated into Memphis proper by later rulers. Recent and ongoing archaeological work in the Memphite necropolis has actually uncovered the fascinating tombs of these foreign soldiers and merchants. They were buried in a hybridized Egyptian style, but their graves were packed with telltale foreign goods. Archaeologists have found Carian scripts, beautiful Greek pottery, and bronze weapons that look distinctively Aegean rather than Egyptian. For the deeply conservative Egyptian priesthood and the proud native warrior caste, known as the Machimoy, the site of Pharaoh Apries, constantly surrounded by these culturally alien foreigners in his towering, impenetrable palace, was a source of bitter, boiling resentment. The Apries Foundations were being heavily guarded by foreign shields, a political reality that aggressively alienated the pharaoh from his own native people. Yet while Apries sat isolated in his Memphis fortress, his grand vision for the Giza Plateau was remarkably hands-on. The 26th dynasty witnessed a massive surge in tomb construction at Giza, specifically targeted in the sacred area near the Great Sphinx and the ancient causeway of Khafre. If you take a walk around the Sphinx today, you will likely notice incredibly deep, dark shafts cut directly into the solid bedrock. Many of these are the famous side shaft tombs. Unlike the traditional mastabas of the Old Kingdom, which were essentially houses for the dead built up above the ground, the Saites decided to dig deeply down. Driven by the rampant, highly organized tomb robbing that plagued the era, they created complex, heavily fortified subterranean palaces to protect their mummies from thieves. The Tomb of Thuri, a high-ranking official of the 26th dynasty, stands as a prime, masterclass example of this architectural shift. Located near the Eastern Cemetery of Giza, it demonstrates the site archizing style perfectly. The intricate reliefs carved onto his tomb walls copy the scenes from the adjacent, thousands of years older 4th dynasty tombs so flawlessly that early European Egyptologists frequently had trouble telling the ancient originals and the site copies apart. The Temple of Isis, the mistress of the pyramid, where the famous inventory stela was discovered, served as the ultimate spiritual anchor for this Saite presence at Giza. Apries and his predecessors aggressively expanded this once small shrine, transforming it into a wildly popular, heavily trafficked pilgrimage site. It was right here that the Saites successfully bridged the immense psychological gap between the colossal, godlike, distant figures of Khufu and Khafre and the more intimate, personal piety that defined the late period of Egyptian history. They effectively transformed the Great Pyramid. It was no longer just the sealed, inaccessible tomb of a dead god-king. It became a massive reliquary for Isis, worshipped as the grieving mother and the ultimate magical protector of the realm. But history is rarely kind to those who balance on the edge of a sword, and the end of the reign of Apries unfolded like a dark, bloody Greek tragedy, playing out in the literal shadow of the very monuments he so desperately sought to emulate. The catalyst for his downfall occurred in 570 BCE, an event known as the Libyan disaster. Apries made a fatal geopolitical miscalculation. He dispatched a massive army comprised exclusively of native Egyptian troops to assist the local Libyans against the encroaching Greek colony of Cyrene. The military expedition was an absolute, unmitigated catastrophe. The native Egyptian forces were brutally slaughtered by the Greeks. The battered, bloodied survivors who managed to limp back home returned with a dark, viral conspiracy theory. They became absolutely convinced that Apries had intentionally sent them into a trap to be massacred. They believed the pharaoh wanted to systematically weaken the native Egyptian military establishment so he could rely solely and absolutely on his highly paid Greek and Carian mercenaries. This deep-seated paranoia ignited a spectacular mutiny. The native army revolted and formally declared Amasis, a highly respected general of common birth, as the new pharaoh of Egypt. Apries, supremely confident in the loyalty of his heavily armored foreign guard and the sheer impregnability of his towering fortress palace in Memphis, flatly refused to step down. The resulting civil war was brief, but exceptionally brutal. Apries led his elite army of Carian and Ionian mercenaries out to face Amasis at the Battle of Memphis. Despite the mercenaries possessing significantly heavier armor, advanced bronze weaponry, and superior tactical training, they were ultimately overwhelmed by the sheer, unstoppable numerical advantage of the Egyptian national army fighting for Amasis. The mercenary lines broke, the battle was lost, and Pharaoh Apries was captured alive. Here, however, the historical narrative takes a uniquely and profoundly Egyptian turn. Amasis did not simply execute Apries on the battlefield. Instead, he brought the fallen, humiliated king back to the palace of Apries in Memphis, the very fortress Apries had designed and built to project his divine authority. Amasis kept him there as a royal guest, or rather a high-status prisoner, for quite some time. Amasis co-ruled with him in a tense, awkward arrangement to maintain the illusion of cosmic order. However, the Egyptian populace, still grieving the catastrophic losses of the Libyan campaign, demanded blood and vengeance. Eventually, the political pressure became too great. Apries was handed over to a furious mob and was brutally strangled to death. Yet, Amasis was an incredibly astute and pragmatic politician. He knew that he could not simply discard the body of an anointed pharaoh like a common criminal without deeply offending the gods and destabilizing the delicate spiritual balance of Egypt. So he gave his deposed rival a full, magnificent royal burial in the Saite royal necropolis located in Sais, ensuring his legacy remained intertwined with the spiritual centers of Giza and Memphis. By burying Apries with the highest traditional honors, Amasis masterfully absorbed the divine legitimacy of the 26th Dynasty foundations, smoothly pivoting the entire country toward a new, highly prosperous era under his own rule. Fast forward to the modern day. The thrilling February 2026 discovery at Telephone Aziz, the modern name for the site of the Memphis Palace, brings this entire epic narrative into incredibly sharp relief. The tantalizing clues painstakingly unearthed by the joint Egyptian-Chinese mission include massive limestone blocks clearly inscribed with the royal cartouche of Apries, newly identified fragments of a monumental temple gate, and distinct, carbonized evidence of heavy burning. This burn layer likely perfectly correlates to the violent destruction that occurred either during the fiery civil war with Amasis or during the devastating Persian invasion that swept through Egypt just decades later. These findings spectacularly validate the ancient, sometimes doubted descriptions provided by classical historians like Herodotus. We are now realizing, with hard archaeological proof, that the Apries foundations were vastly more extensive, complex, and significant than anyone previously dared to imagine. The towering platform was not just a secluded residential palace for an out-of-touch king. It was a highly fortified, raised citadel that seamlessly integrated complex religious rituals, intense military oversight, and sprawling administrative functions into one massive, dominating structure. It served as the direct architectural prototype for the heavily fortified royal districts that would come to visually and politically characterize later ancient eras across the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Why does all of this matter to us today? Rediscovering the true depth and ambition of the 26th Dynasty in Giza and Memphis fundamentally challenges the lazy, popular historical narrative that ancient Egypt simply ended or went into a sad, slow decline immediately after the glamorous New Kingdom. The era of Pharaoh Apries vividly demonstrates a civilization that was incredibly vibrant, deeply self-reflective, and astonishingly resilient in the face of massive global changes. The people of the Saite Renaissance did not just passively live in the physical shadow of the Great Pyramids, they actively engaged with these ancient megastructures. They rigorously restored them, they repurposed them, and they brilliantly used the immense psychological gravity of the Giza Plateau to proudly redefine their own identity in a rapidly shifting multicultural world. The Apries Foundations are a profound testament to the enduring, almost magical power of Giza. Even 2,000 years after King Khufu laid the final gleaming stone on the Great Pyramid, the ruling pharaohs of the 26th Dynasty intrinsically understood a core truth of their civilization. To legitimately rule Egypt, to command the awe and respect of both native citizens and foreign mercenaries alike, one had to metaphorically and physically stand firmly upon the ancient bedrock of the Giza Plateau, powerfully linking an uncertain future to a glorious, eternal past. As the desert sands shift once again in 2026, slowly revealing more of the lost, magnificent city of Apries, we are deeply reminded of a wonderful historical truth. Giza is never truly finished. It is a landscape that is constantly being rediscovered, rebuilt, and beautifully reimagined by every generation that stands before it. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the lost world of the Saite Renaissance and the incredible discoveries reshaping our understanding of the ancient past. Keep questioning the world, keep exploring the unknown, and we will see you next time on Fun Facts Online.